Morning, my friends. Good Thursday morning to you. Well, because for you, it's Thursday morning. This is going live. This will be live streamed at 9 o'clock on Thursday, May 19th. For me, it's 9 o'clock Wednesday evening, but I'm getting this in for you. Just a little bit hectic today. Anyway, for you, it's live. And thanks for joining. I really do appreciate the fact that you folks find this, and I'm humbled by the fact that you find this valuable, and you find time to watch these videos, and to sometimes be able to join me live, and sometimes you can't, and you still find time to catch up, and that's wonderful. It's amazing. But who am I, and what am I talking about? Well, I'm PB. This is PB Reads the Bible, and this is episode 8 on our journey through the book of First Samuel. Episode 8 on our journey through the book of First Samuel. So we will be looking at chapter 8 of that book. 22 verses, so it's not a super long one. Got some stuff to talk about, but I know I have to keep it to under 30 minutes because otherwise I won't be able to share this video. So I'm going to jump right into it. If there's time at the end, I'll make an announcement or two, but we're going to jump right in. So just as the reminder of where we're at, we finished 5, 6, and we finished. Samuel has returned to the stage, and we learned all about him, and he is firmly established as the story shows him to be not only a prophet, but serving some priestly functions, and also as a judge. He's doing 3 different jobs. He's serving the people of Israel in 3 different ways. So we think everything's going swimmingly, that God has established, returned things to a good situation, handled the issues of the crisis, we might say, that had happened because of Eli's son and their corruption of the covenantal system, and has also ended the problem from the outside, the military problem with the Philistines. So we think everything's a-okay to the way that ended, but we're going to find out things are not so a-okay. So that's where we're at. Remember, that's where we're at. All right. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges. In Beersheba, I'm going to pause a little bit as we go along. I think that's going to be easier on this story. Now, Beersheba was pretty far away. It was in a much different section of Israel than Samuel was in the 3 places that he was listing as. So it's probably an exaggeration or a misquotation of where they're at. In fact, the historian Josephus shares a different tradition, that they were actually judges in Bethel, which would make more sense geographically speaking. And yet his sons did not follow in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Ooh, we see there's trouble on the horizon, right? There's trouble right here in River City. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us, then, a king to govern us like other nations." Pause. Go back to the pausing so often. Again, don't think it's all the elders of Israel, but certain elders from a certain area of Israel would be far more likely at this point. And they go to Ramah, which is Samuel's hometown. They don't really wait for him to be at one of his judging locations, so to speak. They go directly to him at Ramah. Who were these elders? We're not really told very much. There are some theories, which we'll talk about. But they're telling Samuel to appoint for us a king. They still trust Samuel. They just don't trust his sons, because they are not following in your ways. But they want They want Samuel to give them a king like other nations, which is very unusual because all the old rules in the covenant system and everything is ways to be different than other nations, and they're only supposed to have one king. God is their king. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to Yahweh, and Yahweh said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice only. You shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." Pause. So they're telling Samuel, "You appoint a king over us." Samuel doesn't like this idea and talks to God about it. It seems that Samuel's taking it personally because he's the one who's been judged. And I should have said this too, where it says back in verse 5, when it says a king to govern us, the word that's translated govern us, and I believe it says lead us. Yes, lead us is how NIV translates it. But in Hebrew, it's the word judge. It's weird that they don't translate it that way. The NIV actually puts that as a footnote, that it could be translated judge, which, so rather than Samuel's sons being judge over them, they now want to have a different judge and basically replace the judge with a king. They want somebody else to be judge over them. They want that person to be king. So Samuel takes this very personally. Right? He feels it's a personal affront, and he's hurt. He's hurt by it. We can see that in he's like almost pouting as he goes and talks to God. But immediately God soothes Samuel. God doesn't act out against the people. God doesn't say things about the people, the elders. God says to Samuel, just chill out, dude. They're not doing this again to you. They're not rejecting you. That's a good word, reject. They have not rejected you. They have rejected me, just as they have all along, right from the time I came out of Egypt. And what does it say in particular? Forsaking me and serving other gods. And serving other gods. So what the author is doing here is equating this desire for a king as apostasy, as heresy, a rejection of God and as king. Okay, so that's what they're doing, and they're also doing it to you. He says, "Now then, listen to their voice." So God tells them twice. God has said that in this little passage here. Listen to the voice of the people. Listen to the voice of their people. Okay, you're going to give them a king, but warn them what it's like. Samuel reported all the words of Yahweh to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day, You will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but Yahweh will not answer you in that day. Pause. Ooh. So Samuel goes through a list of a litany, we might say, of things that the king is going to do. Be warned, people. This is what your king is going to be like, and all of it, really, all of it is monetary in nature. Really, it's all the wealth. He's saying the king is going to take your stuff and he's going to make himself rich. The very thing that the very thing that Samuel's sons were doing and they were complaining about, right? Taking bribes, and which were things that, don't get me wrong, Samuel's sons were wrong. And there is in Deuteronomy, I think it's Deuteronomy, there is a law for a king to create a king. They weren't supposed to have a king, but there was a law in there about having a king, and how a king was supposed to act. And all of these things are a direct violation of that. So Samuel's sons were wrong, but these things that they're listing, they're wrong for what, this king. And these are the things he's going to do. He's going to take your stuff as his own, all of your best stuff too. He's going to take your sons. He's going to put your sons to work on his on his land. He's going to put them to work as charioteers and charioteers, and all that. So in other words, he's going to draft them into the army. He's going to draft them into the army, and he's going to take your women and your daughters and put them to work in his on his property, in his palace, we might say. He's going to take all your stuff, and especially all the best stuff, and what he doesn't keep for himself, he's going to give to his courtiers, to the people who are closest to him, right? The ones, the higher ups, we might say, his special people, his sycophants, who say yes all the time. They're the ones that he's going to give your best stuff to. And after all of this, we would think, boy, the people are going to say no, right? They got to go turn back to God and say, you know what? We don't want that kind of a king. We're much better off with God as king. Well, is that what they say? Let's read verses 19 through 22 and find out. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, no, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. Pause. And again, that word govern would be judge, should be judge. When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of Yahweh. Yahweh said to Samuel, listen to their voice and set a king over them. Samuel then said to the people of Israel, each of you return home. Pause. End of chapter. So the people still refuse, even after all this stuff. Samuel says, all this terrible stuff the king is going to do to you. They still say, no, we want a king. You're going to appoint a king over us. We want a king. Now, it's interesting. There's a couple different views as to, well, first let's talk about that. Why are these people so adamant? Some scholars, not necessarily all, definitely not all, probably not even a majority of scholars, but I think this is an interesting argument, an interesting point of view. From that statement, they get the idea that these elders are the wealthy of the time, and the powerful, we might say, of the time, the ones who would be least impacted, in fact, wouldn't be impacted at all by all these things about a king. They would see that they would consider themselves and probably ensure that they were above that kind of a treatment by the king. So they didn't care that would happen. Okay, I just find that interesting. I can follow the logic to that as well. It's definitely not what's said there, That's filling in the blanks. Who are these elders? And it's definitely just guessing at it. But I can see the person's point. I can see that. I can follow their train of thought and their logic on that. Um, Back to that, but to that list, that whole litany of things that the king is going to do to your people. Um, there's basically two schools of thought, although a third one would also work as well. Some see it as the Deuteronomistic writer, the D writer, from time in exile, from the time when the people are in exile, long after a whole bunch of kings quite literally just uh, went through history and saw all the things that the kings did that were bad and put them into this list. And that definitely works, because we can see that numerous kings are going to be exactly like that. However, there's another argument that there are documents that date older than that, as far back as 13th or 14th century BCE. So even before this time is the time setting of our story, from other places, from Canaanite kings, that they were actually doing those things. So, and so that it could be used as a warning. Of course, I don't think, because I'm not the only one that thinks this, that those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Both can be true. That the other kings from other nations were like that, but also that these kings do become like that, and so the Deuteronomistic writer wanted to use that to point out the badness of the monarchy, we might say, and trying to emphasize things. Some of the wording in there, and this is kind of I don't know how to repeat it. It says multiple times, in that day, in that day, you will recognize the king you chose. And that this happened with the king you have chosen for yourselves. The people aren't choosing the king, right? They want Samuel to appoint him, so they haven't chosen a king. They've chosen to have a king, but that's not what it says. It says the king you have chosen. And Samuel, we will see, is the one who chooses, who appoints, but it's literally God, of course, that chooses the king. But it also says, but Yahweh will not answer you in that day. So the use of that phrase, in that day, could point to the fact this was being written during the exile, and just as and is literally speaking about the exile. He's literally speaking about that, the exile, or like this is why we're here. This is why we're at this place, and this is why God isn't answering us, because of the king that we had chosen in that day. It's interesting. That's possible. It's possible. Anyway. So, but notice though in 21 and 22, so Samuel heard everything. The people said, "No, we still want a king. We don't care. We want a king." Oh, and let me back up, verse 20, because now the people add a different reason, a secondary reason, not necessarily secondary. That would be lesser importance, but a second reason. So they want a king to judge them. In other words, they want to replace Samuel and his sons, in particular his sons. They want a king to judge them, to judge us, and to fight our battles. Go out before us and fight our battles, which again was something that God was supposed to be doing, right? That they were supposed to trust God to fight their battles, and that's the only reason they beat the Philistines in yesterday's chapter. In yesterday's chapter, that was the only reason they won the battle, because God fought for them. But now they want this king not only to judge them, but to go out before them and fight their battles. So they want a military ruler. Interesting. Which Some would say that that points, although it's not in there again, but the threat of the Philistines is still hanging in the air, and perhaps there's even been disturbances, troubles, and stuff like that. So they want a king to take care of that, to go out and before us and fight our battle. Okay. So Samuel goes and tells God, they still want their king. And God again says, listen to them, listen to their voice, listen to their voice and set a king over them. But notice, Samuel does not immediately do that. He seems to be still dragging his feet. Maybe, some would say, oh, he's trying to give Israel another chance, hoping against hope that they're going to change their mind and get it right. Okay, maybe, but I think it's far more likely that he's still hurt. He's still hurt, so he doesn't want to give in to them. He's being stubborn, and he's dragging his feet as long as he can before he actually gives in and gives them the king to judge them. The king to judge them, and he tells each of them, just go to your homes. Go to your home. So that's it for today, my friends. That's it for today. I do have still a few minutes, so we'll be all right on that. We'll look at chapter 9 on Monday. We'll look at chapter 9 on Monday. All right. So just a couple quick announcements. Of course, Sunday is worship. Woo-hoo, worship on Sunday, live in person at 8:15 and 10:45. The 10:45 service is also live streamed. So if you can't make it in person, that's we get that, or if you're too far away, because I know some of you aren't from Waynesboro area, and you're from all over the place sometimes, and we'd love to have you join us in worship, because you are with us even while you're not with us, so to speak. So just if you're going to do that live stream, of course, please make sure you've got some sort of a sacred space set up. I want to make sure that you feel totally engaged in our worship. And I do make some of those suggestions in our when I do my announcements. So of course, but just make sure it's try to have a sacred space set up, candles, cross, Bible, all that stuff, just to help you and to help you feel fully engaged. So anyway, my friends, that's it for today. See you Monday, if not Sunday. As you do pray that this has been beneficial for you, of course, that you've learned something or you learned something as you go about your days, not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything our living, loving, active God is doing in your life. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.